Alt, and oh, there's the recording. Got it. Yeah, my name is Michael Carter-Alt. I'm the Immersive Technology Specialist here at the RU Library, and joining me is Fangmin Wang, who is the Head of Library Information Technology Services. Uh, Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the land. So we acknowledge that Toronto is a dish with one spoon territory. Dish with one spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and people, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. We are fortunate to have the privilege of working on these territories. You may be joining us today from other places near and far, and we also acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of those lands. As we make this acknowledgement, we are dedicated to continuing to increase our awareness, understanding, and conscientiousness actions of this land. So yeah, as I was saying before, my name is Michael Carter Arlt. This is just a just brief introduction. We are based in the RU Library, and as I said before, I'm the Immersive Technology Specialist. Joining me is Head of Library Information Technology Services, which is Fangmin Wang. And I'll let Fangmin take the lead on the next few slides here. So if you want to take over, Fangmin.
Sure. Thank you, Michael. Can everyone hear me okay? I just always want to check if I start. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. Thank you, Reese. It's a really my great pleasure to be here to see everyone virtually. And so before we start our presentation, I want to so Michael, there's something like maybe some black or gray line along the title section. Can you see it? I don't know if
Is it gone now?
okay, yeah, it's gone. Okay, great. Thanks. Yeah, so before we start our presentation, I want to maybe talk a few like technical terms through our presentation. So the first one is the obviously the immersive technology. Immersive technology is an umbrella that encompasses like virtual technology such as augmented reality. We always call it like AR, and virtual reality we call or we always call VR. Sometimes in the library we always kind of misunderstood this term because we use the VR as a virtual reference. And in this case, we refer to the virtual reality, as well as like another term we're going to use is a mixed reality, and also the extended XR extended reality. So what is a virtual reality? The virtual reality is a simulated experience that can be similar or completely different from our the real world. And as a matter of fact, our library actually have acquired quite a few VR headsets from probably 5-6 years ago, such as Oculus Rift and the HTC Vive, and Lenovo Mirage Solo. Those headsets have been well used by our faculty and students. And the second term I'm going to talk a little bit about here is the augmented reality. So the augmented reality really means it overlays digital content and information onto the physical world. So I believe some of you have played Pokemon Go and the game on your smartphone. So if you have that kind of experience, you must know how augmented reality AR works. The third one I want to briefly mention is actually the mixed reality, which we call MR. So if you know Microsoft HoloLens, it's a really good example what the mixed reality equipment will look like. And based on Microsoft, their definition, mixed reality is a blend of physical and digital worlds, and unlocking the links between human, computer, and the environment interaction. So the last one, like we don't have the slide here, is about the XR, the extended reality. So Michael probably will talk a little bit more about that. So XR actually is the emerging umbrella, that term that for all the immersive technology, including one I just mentioned about VR, AR, and MR, plus those that are still to be created. And next slide, Michael. Thanks. So I think for our topic and today's presentation, we're going to talk about how our library embrace the immersive technology. So actually, one of the inspiration I had is through some of my literature review. And so here a few sentences I got from the I believe it's from the ACRL 2021 Environment Scan report. And in their report, there's a section called about emerging technology. So the XR, VR, AR, or immersive technology is one part of the emerging technology section. So the fourth sentence I got here from the section is about implication to the libraries. So obviously, I think according to the report, the library should up to date the new technology like AR, VR, XR, and then work with collaborate with the campus partner in terms of discover some useful applications. Obviously, academic library also should create collaborative space for accommodation and cooperation of immersive technology. And part of the goal is to support the appropriate curriculum. So we'll mention in detail in our presentation at the latter part. So the librarians also should look for the opportunity how we can integrate with the immersive technology and also the the classroom practice and examples, and so to support faculty and students. And the last thing the report also mentioned about, it is a great opportunity for the library and to kind of using this opportunity to display, using AR or VR to display our own archive in the collection through three-dimensional site and enhanced accessibility of the digital media. So we will have some examples about this particular case. May not be necessary from our own library archives, but we have some really good example how we work with our research partners. Next slide, please, Michael. So next slide, Michael. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so after that, a little bit, no, previous slides. You're too fast. And so Michael, can you go back? Yeah, great. So after reading the ACL report, and so have been thinking about how our own library at the local level, how we can start to embrace and adopt the immersive technology. So one of the things we have done is through our strategic planning process, which is there is a component of technology environment scan. So Michael and I and a few others, we have done some environment scan about the topic of immersive technology. So we did our due diligence about looking at how other university and library they have adopted and applied the immersive technology. So second part I would say at our local library level is we are very big fan of doing some experimentation plus the research and development. Obviously, the immersive technology is a kind of sort of part of emerging technology category. So that really requires quite a bit of work in terms of how we explore and through our experimentation and get a sense how we go about it to support the teaching, learning, and the research. So in our presentation, we also will mention about some of our collaborative project with the Arkansas Museum, specifically using the AR, VR, or other 360-degree kind of immersive technology. So the other piece for me is for library is really important. So that's one thing I think we have to do for if your library want to invest in big way in terms of immersive technology is the right talent. And we have a really good library team, but we also need some of the particular technical creative technologists like the immersive technology specialist position we created this year. So Michael actually is our very recent hire. And so his main kind of responsibility is to do anything with the immersive technology in our local library. So the last thing, once you have all those pieces, and when we have all those pieces, then the next thing naturally for us to think about is how do we establish a proper formal programming services and to support teaching, learning, and the research mission. We have done some very preliminary work engaging with the faculty and the students. And so we'll give you a few examples throughout the presentation. But we are still in a very early stage, I would say. And but I think we personally, I have seen some really promising examples. Next slide, Michael. Yeah, so as I mentioned, the kind of experimentation is very important to embrace any new type of technology in the library. So we actually, the first time we had an experience with the immersive technology like a VR is actually through our digital media experience lab, like back to part 2015 and 2016. So when we opened the digital media experience lab in 2015, one of the emerging technology we have in-house is those VR technology. But you can see this kind of sort of old format of a VR technology back in 2015, 2016. It was still popular. However, we really don't know how that type of technology can be utilized to support teaching, learning, research. And but back in the days, we really use it like as a more kind of technology for students to play, to understand. So this was still kind of at the beginning level in my view, but that's was a really important kind of starting point to understand the feedback from students related to this type of technology. But over time, I think we have really developed quite a solid understanding and how we can go about it. Next slide, please, Michael. Yeah, so this is a, a picture of Michael. He showed Michael, I want to talk a little bit about the story of how we hire Michael as an immersive technology specialist. And Michael was a graduate student at our university. He was enrolled in the Master of Digital Media program. That's Michael's background. And I believe that picture was taken in 2018 or 2019. And so, because we create a new kind of digital technology innovation research space. It's called the Library Collaboratory back in 2017. That the main goal was to support faculty, research, and graduate students for their research and interdisciplinary projects. So Michael was actually a member of our collaboratory, and so the picture here is at our grand opening house, and Michael is actually demonstrate his kind of master thesis project related to the holographic glass. So actually, I direct our president Muhammad Lashmi to one of the showcase room, and so Muhammad was very interested in Michael's project. So was I, and so that was my first impression how the immersive technology, particularly the holographic kind of technology, can enhance the learning experience. So another picture is me to give an introduction to a group of graduate students about because we were hosting a grad student seminar, and so Michael was presenting the virtual reality piece, how that can enhance the teaching, learning, research experience. So this is a kind of important journey for us to coming from a kind of basic kind of experience with the VR and to actually supporting the graduate student, the VR and the immersive technology related projects. And next slide, please, Michael. So yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, we had this kind of experimentation period. So a couple of years ago, actually, right before the pandemic, I believe, maybe a half year before the pandemic started. So we had an opportunity to work with the Arkansas Museum. So so the museum has approached us as a partner for a research project funded by the Canada Council for the Arts. The goal of the project was to explore user-centric strategies to offer off-site audience access to museum content through immersive technology, such as AR and VR, to improve the public access and engagement with art. So so I helped the kind of facilitate and organize the interdisciplinary project team at our university that includes graduate student like Michael and a faculty advisor, and also several of my librarian colleagues like Kelly Dermody and Sally Wilson were also part of that project team. So I really want to thank everyone on this. So we listed everybody who have involved with this project on our university side. So combining the strength of and the talent of both our library and the Arkansas Museum, we have really produced some amazing prototypes for the museum, and to discover the possibility of providing interactive digital museum experience. And through that research project, we have tried a wide range of creative technology techniques, such as augmented reality, animation, digital fabrication, 3D visualization, holographic display. Well, a lot of it is actually based on Michael's thesis project. So we basically incorporate faculty advice and also librarian expertise and graduate students kind of research into this project. Next slide, please, Michael. Yeah, so Michael, can you just play the video? So this is one of example of one of the beginning invention we did this for the Arkansas Museum. Can you just stop? Kind of noisy. Yeah, sorry everyone. So you can see this is a kind of a video taken by Michael. So he basically used his own smartphone to using the AR software to overlay a piece of manuscript that was coming from it's a copy of a real original manuscript from the museum. So the image, you can see the image, static image, suddenly become animated interactive after it's recognized by the AR software. And so you also can tell on my left side, the folio, the Farsi language being become translated to the English using the AR software technique. And so maybe Michael, can you take it further and explain how you did for this part?
Yep. So thank you for all that explanation, Fangmin. Yeah. So to go into a little bit more context about what's going on here, and a little bit more information. Let me just go back to this video here, and I'm just going to mute it this time. But one thing I want to explain is the folio or the artwork is being used as an image target, and using augmented reality, an animation plays over top of that. So what I'm doing here is I'm pulling away from the image target so that you can see that when the image is identified, it starts playing this overlay, and it does a really good job at tracking it as well. So what's going on here is we've got the manuscript that's in Farsi, and it translates that to tell you the story of what's happening in the poem, but also going on is there's a war happening between two sides. So I also wanted to kind of showcase that with some 2D animation. So it's pretty simple stuff, but it is very effective. When we were doing user testing for this, it proved to be very effective. And this is something I worked on as well for the Aga Khan Museum. This was supposed to be a part of a remastered exhibit that we did for them that lasted for a whole year. It ended actually in the summer this year. It didn't quite, just because of technical limitations, it didn't quite manifest, but it's really powerful tool of how we can use augmented reality to explain, let's say, in this case, it's a folio, it's an artwork, but there's no text, right? There's no so even if you were a native Farsi speaker, you wouldn't even really be able to understand unless there was a description what is going on within the folio. So I wanted to showcase like how can we add a contextual layer to artworks using augmented reality. So I'm just going to play the video here. So as you can see, what's happening here, I'm just going to pause this for a second, right here. So basically, the folio itself doesn't have any description, right? By the way, this is just placeholder. I was just showing this was a prototype. But what I was trying to showcase is that using augmented reality, we can identify certain figures within the folio. And when the figure is identified, it gives us a description of that person. So if I keep playing the video, you'll see how as I move around this folio, it does a great job at tracking, but as soon as it identifies the person, it shows me a little box. So it tells me a little bit more about what's going on there. At least that's what was supposed to be the intention. Again, this is just placeholder. But what I wanted to showcase is that using augmented reality, you can, let's say if you were in a museum or let's say even an art gallery, you can learn more about pieces of art just by using your smartphone in augmented reality. So I'm just going to go past here. So one of the things I also want to talk about is photogrammetry in education. And some of you might have heard of it before, some of you might have not. I'm just going to kind of briefly explain what it is. But basically, photogrammetry is when we take an object, right? In this case, this is another object provided by the Aga Khan Museum, and it's a ceramic bottle. And you take images of that object from all angles. So basically it has to be captured from different perspectives, top down, and then also 360, a bunch of pictures in a sort of a 360 format. So this is just an example. I have a bunch of images here of what that looks like. So you have the subject, and we take images in a slow rotation around the entire object. And then those images are stitched together in a software, a photogrammetry software to create a 3D model. So this is the actual 3D model here. And photogrammetry actually does a really great job of creating 3D models. So if you're not a 3D modeler, you don't necessarily have to be in order to create these photogrammetry 3D models because all you really need is a smartphone. And even better, if you have, let's say, a new iPhone or an iPad that has something called a LiDAR scanner, it does a really great job at replicating physical objects as 3D models. So I want to showcase what that might look like in augmented reality. So again, this is like a rough prototype that I did, and I'll show you. This is essentially using the 3D model that I just showed you and augmented reality. So as I'm scanning, you'll see that I have this base here. This is just a piece of paper on like a foam block. And this base is actually the image target. So what I'm trying to do is when the camera identifies the image target, the 3D model is projected on top of that image target. So you can see that what I can do is I can spin it around and it does a really good at tracking it. And something that's also really interesting about this particular um, example is that the ceramic bottle that's the ceramic bottle that was 3D modeled, it actually has two unique sides to it. So what's really interesting is if I actually just go back here for a second and I show you, this is the actual ceramic bottle on display at the Aga Khan Museum. They actually have it on display against a wall, and you can't actually see both sides of the ceramic bottle. So in some ways, you're adding another layer of pedagogy to the ceramic bottle itself because you're able to give people not only the ability to see it closer as you hold it closer to the camera, but you're also able to spin it around and see both sides of the art on the ceramic bottle. So again, we'll see that we have this side, I spin it around, and there's a different side. It's hard to tell, but there are two unique sides to this bottle. So why would we use photogrammetry and how is it useful for primary research? So I did a guest lecture the other day for an archaeology class, and one of the things that I was talking about was photogrammetry and primary research or photogrammetry in education. And photogrammetry provides a really great way of learning about certain artifacts or objects, especially if they're larger or if they're really, let's say there's only like one in the world and it's kind of locked away in a museum somewhere. Maybe it might even be light sensitive. You don't really want to be showing that on display all the time. So how can we get people to learn about these objects or artifacts? And one of the ways to do that is through 3D modeling using photogrammetry. So here we have the physical object of this bust here. And this on the right-hand side is actually a photogrammetry replication or a 3D model of the actual object. So we can see the similarities are very, very close. Again, if I was an archaeology class, this would be really great for me to show my students, at least learn a little bit about some of the object without actually having to physically see it in person. So one of the things that I was also talking about in this guest lecture is, how can we tell if something is created by photogrammetry, and how can we tell if something is created by a 3D or 3D modeling software? Because the thing is, even though there's a lot of great 3D models out there, they're sometimes not necessarily accurate because, again, it's an artist who creates the 3D model. So we don't know how much context they had or how much research they did to create these 3D models. So even though they look really, really good, there are certain inaccuracies for the 3D model because it wasn't actually modeled off of the actual physical object. So we have these two busts here, and both of them look incredible, right? But how can we tell which one is photogrammetry and how can we tell which one is not? So this is, by the way, on a site called Sketchfab. And in Sketchfab, we're able to look at things like the wireframe. So the wireframe is essentially like a point cloud. So it's essentially, how can I describe it the best? It's almost like a mesh that it's like 3D data of a 3D model. So it's essentially the geometry of a 3D model. So we can see that on the left-hand side, this 3D model has very smooth lines. It's very symmetrical, right? But the one on the right is very dense. It almost looks like cobwebs in a way. And we can tell from the right-hand side that this was actually created using photogrammetry because photogrammetry creates extremely dense point clouds, which is not really optimized. But the thing is, again, if you want accuracy in terms of physical objects, you would probably have to look at, again, if it was on Sketchfab, you could look at the wireframe and identify how or if it was created using photogrammetry. And I'm just going to back up for a second and show the reason why this is important is because if we look at the two side by side, although they look very similar, there are certain features such as the jawline that are clearly different. So this is a kind of a big deal, right? Because when we're looking at something like this, like a bust, this is a Nefertiti, by the way, the bust of Nefertiti. You would obviously want to learn about more, especially like the facial features, because it is a bust of Nefertiti. Things like the jawline is kind of a extremely big deal. So even the lips, for example. And we'll also notice that on the actual artifact, it has a chip. There's like a kind of like it's broken off the top here, which the 3D model does not have. So you have to be careful when you're using 3D models for primary research because if it's not modeled off of photogrammetry, rule of thumb is just maybe find another 3D model. So this is something I want to kind of showcase right now, and this kind of leads into some of the, the actual 360 immersive environment that we're going to be talking about in this presentation. But all of these things sort of combine. The reason why we're talking about augmented reality and virtual reality and mixed reality is because we can kind of take all of these or elements of these different realities or anything within extended reality and bring it into the immersion studio, for example, which we're going to be talking about, or a 360 environment. So this is an example. I'm just going to play a little bit of this video, but this is an example of actually a 360 video.
Sorry, Michael. I think we've lost you a little bit. I'm not sure if you're fully plugged in.
Oh.
There we go.
Is it okay now?
Yeah.
Okay. I think it's because my headphones are literally disintegrating. They're kind of like broken now, so I have to yeah, they're held together with tape right now. So if I cut out, it's probably because of that. So you can hear me now, right? Are we good? I can't see anyone.
We can hear you, Michael.
Okay, great. So yeah, I'm just going to kind of play a little bit of this video here. I'm going to turn on the sound just for a second. So as I can actually interact with this video, by the way. I can at least spin around and show you the 360 environment of this. So that's kind of what I'm doing right here. But there are certain things like if I just script.
The wife of Osiris. She can be represented in many ways. Here, she is shown wearing a horned headdress with a red sun disk and a powerful cobra.
So I'm just going to pause it right there. But one of the interesting things about this is in this simulation, the user can, or the student, whoever is participating in this simulation, can click on aspects of this wall, for example, and learn about some of the subjects. So there's a bunch of hieroglyphs that are on the wall, and obviously to many people, they might not know who these people are or depicted here. So it provides a really unique learning example because, again, in the search of virtual space, I can go up, I can click on one of these figures on the wall, and a narrative plays to help explain the context or who's situated within the in the picture here.
We are
So now I'm going to pass things back to Fangmin, and he's going to explain just a little bit, just give you a brief introduction on how this has led into the remastered exhibit, which is what I was talking about earlier.
Great, thank you, Michael. As Michael just demonstrated a little bit the kind of project we have done for the Canada Arts Council funded project with the Archicon Museum. So we believe the best way to really predict the future is to learn from the past. And so our partnership with the Archicon Museum has helped us tremendously gain a good understanding of the role of immersive technology and its potential to enhance learning and teaching research. Recently, our library has made a strategic investment in this area, and so we created a 360-degree kind of immersive environment, and based on the Igloo vision technology. And so before we actually kind of roll out this environment to our academic community, so Michael and I and a few others, we have discussed how we can approach this. So part of a really important key factor is how do we help our academic community to create their content that can be appreciated, that can be used in our 360-degree environment. And so Michael will talk a little bit about what we have learned from the remastered exhibition project, which is this is not part of the Canada Arts Council grant project, and but there are some specific kind of requirement for this project. And so Michael, do you want to just touch a little bit talk a little bit about this project?
Yep. So yeah, as Fangmin was describing, we have this partnership with the Aga Khan Museum, and it's been a really great partnership between our university and the Aga Khan Museum. And again, one of the reasons why we're talking about all of these things is because when we get to where we are right now with our 360 environment, which again, we're slowly getting to, it's important to understand the different components that go into like why we need to, let's say, invest in something like an immersive environment, because some people or some universities, some libraries might not be interested, at least from the beginning. But when you start to take on certain projects that utilize different technologies, like for example, AR or VR or MR, you understand how these things can kind of get woven in together, and this is how we get to where we are right now, at least in terms of using technology for education. So just briefly want to go into some of the things that we did for the Aga Khan Museum here for the remastered exhibit. QR codes have been very big since COVID-19, and so we've played on that a little bit. So within the museum, there are certain folios. Actually, this is an example of what I was showing before, but
sorry, Michael, can I just stop you for a second? Yep. And I forgot to mention about a little bit of background about this project, because this is actually a very special project that we collaborate with the Archicon Museum. And it's a project was actually developed and launched during the pandemic. So with the purpose of celebrating the ability of the human spirit to overcome adversity. So I think we started probably May or June last year, and sort of finish off like around September, October. And so according to the museum, the remastered exhibition was considered as one of the most innovative and immersive exhibition of Islamic manuscript paintings. So I think what we have learned is any project like that, you require a strong interdisciplinary team, but also how the partnership is also critical. Sorry, Michael, to interrupt.
Yep.
And
No
please
problem.
go ahead.
Yeah, just good. Thank you for adding a little bit more context. So yeah, this was developed during COVID-19. So some of the considerations for this exhibit were like, how can we create interactions that don't allow users to physically touch things? You know, like maybe if you're interacting with certain objects, or if you're creating like an application or something, how do we do that so that at least you can do it from the safety of your own smartphone device? So this is just a very simple example of like if you were in the museum, there's an example of the actual folio or the actual illustration here. And when you scan the QR code, you get a highlighted folio. So the original folio doesn't actually have these highlights, but when you scan the QR code, it will show you this image on your smartphone, and you can tap on the highlighted figures. And then depending on who you click on, like for example, in this particular scenario, the yellow figure was clicked, and he's holding a tambourine, or at least we assume it's a tambourine. So if you wanted to hear a little bit about what that instrument sounds like, which normally you wouldn't be able to hear in, you wouldn't be able to actually learn about this in a museum, or you could, it just, maybe it might be a sound file that you press on a button on a table. We wanted to sort of reinvent that in a way and just provide the trend of using QR codes to enhance how we learn about these folios. And then another thing that we did was animated folio. So this is similar to what we had in the at the beginning with the arrows flying back and forth. We really just wanted to take the folio and add a little bit more, just another layer of like how we tell the story. So you'll notice actually one of the things between this folio and the one that I did before is the Farsi isn't actually translated. And the reason why we actually decided to do this, because we were going to do the translations on all of the animated folios, but the reason why we didn't do it is because the curator of the museum didn't want to invade the artwork too much. So he wanted me to explore how we can use how we tell the story, but he didn't want me to essentially take elements away from the original folio, because it can be considered offensive to certain scholars. Another thing that we did as well is 3D modeling. So I have a pretty strong background now in 3D modeling, and we wanted to explore how we can use 3D models to enhance how we learn about 2D artwork. So again, we have the 2D artwork on the left-hand side. This is the original artwork. And I used a combination of softwares, Blender, Unity, and Photoshop, to essentially deconstruct the 2D artwork and create a 3D artwork from it. So one of the things that is interesting in terms of how we learn about the art piece is on the left-hand side, it's hard to understand the perspective, especially, let's say, the dimension of, let's say, the palace in the back, just because it kind of has a very two-dimensional, very flat look to it. There's no shading or anything with this particular art style. So, and also perspective of the people here, the subjects depicted in the artwork are the same height in the foreground and the background we'll see. So it makes things a little bit hard to understand what's going on. And I wanted to help explain that a little bit more just by just through visual representation. By creating a 3D model of this scene and deconstructing it and then reconstructing it in a 3D scene here, we can see instantly that, you know, the perspective, who's situated on the bottom of the palace, who's situated at the top, and we can also get a better understanding of the way the palace is supposed to look just by looking at it. And then we used, this is again going off of my master's project. I used a technology called holographic displays, and I took the 3D model and I put it inside a holographic display. And one thing I kind of am trying to showcase here on the right in this GIF is as I move from left to right, we can see around the palace, right? So we can understand, for example, if you look at my cursor here, and there's this person here, as I move from one side to the left, or sorry, left to right, the person becomes more or less obstructed. So it actually creates a level of depth to the 3D model without having to physically touch anything or rotate the object in a virtual space. And then last thing is we did digital restoration. So this one is definitely provides, I think, the most learning outcome in terms of how we understand these artworks, because over time, sometimes these artworks become damaged, and there's not really much we can do about that, right? These artworks have been transferred from one hand to another, and through those transfers of ownership, sometimes they degrade over time. And the last thing you really want to do, I think anybody can agree with this, is to physically alter the original and restore it, because a lot of the times it devalues the actual piece itself. So using a technique, well, it's not really, it's really just using Photoshop and Illustrator. Again, these are softwares that I'm very familiar with. I was able to talk with the curator and recreate these artworks using Photoshop and Illustrator. So this is done through, again, a technique I call digital restoration. Museums have done this in the past, so but it's new to how Islamic artwork.
Michael, I want to stop for just a second. We have a question from Richard. How he asked, how did we add animation to the folio images?
Oh, okay, good question. So that was done. You kind of have to know the software, but it was done in After Effects. It's an Adobe software, and essentially, I wonder if I can. It's hard for me to explain, but essentially, what I would do is I would cut out. Let's say I was in Photoshop, for example. I would cut out these characters, right? I'd crop them out of the picture, and then I would isolate individual limbs, for example, like you see this woman's arm here. I would crop this out, and essentially in After Effects, I would add anchor points to these limbs, and then I would add the movement. So essentially, we're just taking, we're almost like, think of it as like if you had a piece of paper or an artwork that was printed on paper, and you were to cut out that artwork with like a X-Acto knife, for example, and then if you were to put like pins inside, let's say, a character's arms, if you cut them out individually, then you can kind of get movement on paper, right? 2D movement. And that's exactly what I did here, just in a digital convention. I hope that makes sense. You kind of have to understand the software a little bit to know what I'm talking about.
No, thank you very much for the explanation. It's amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. So one thing I also want to talk about too is, digital restoration is great, but how does it relate to XR? And this is a demo I just did the other day, where essentially what I'm going to show here in the beginning is a damaged artwork that is on my computer, and I'm using augmented reality to show how if we had a damaged artwork, let's say if it was actually in the museum, we can use augmented reality to show what the restoration looks like. So I'm just going to play the video. Again, at the beginning, nothing will happen. So I'm just showing that that's what the damaged artwork looks like. I'm just going to flip on the restored artwork, and you can see right there, it's swapping the image out, or it's overlaying that image. See how it's now showing me the actual restored artwork. So using augmented reality, we can use the damaged artwork as a image target, and then we can overlay the restored artwork with your smartphone, for example. And I'm just going to pass here. And this is essentially what they look like side by side. So again, this is the damaged artwork, the restored artwork. And then we can use augmented reality to use this as the image target, and this is the overlay. And Fangmin, do you just want to briefly describe the immersion?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, and so the kind of R&D and also experimentation work we have done in the last few years really kind of helped us to really think further how we could create a collaborative space, kind of leveraging immersive technology to support teaching, learning, and research. And so one of the good example, as I mentioned, that this is one of our strategic investment in the recent year, and we call it Immersion Studio, but essentially it's really a 360-degree kind of projection system. but the key for us is not necessarily about the physical tent, but it's more about the immersive content and the creation process, how we can facilitate it, how we can support research faculty, even students, and using our physical environment, but more so about how we can facilitate that kind of content creation. So as I mentioned earlier, the technology we have select from the Igloo Vision technology, the beauty of their technology is not so much about the tent. It's more about the power of the software functions, because the technology we have supports like a game engine like a Unity and Unreal, also kind of 3D software like AutoCAD, and it supported all kinds of 360-degree kind of content, whether it's a video, audio, images, and which really give the flexibility to our faculty and students using their preferred software environment and tool to create their content before they even start using our Immersive Studio room. Next slide, Michael. So before we reach out to our research and learning community, so we basically did some testing first. So this is actually a really good example. I believe at the bottom there's a few actually separate images of the site of Hiroshima, and so actually Michael did a really good work to stitch the all different images together. Then when we project in a 360-degree environment, it looks like real environment. And so we have tested this environment pilot with a few faculty and the students. They all really enjoying and using this environment for the potential study and also classes. Next slide, please, Michael. And so this again, so Michael did a really great test using his just iPhone, right? Because we were thinking about how faculty student can, what kind of tool they can use actually to capture or create content. So one of the examples what Michael did here was just using his iPhone to take some picture, you know, a picture in Ottawa. So then when we import to the Immersive Studio, actually looks really, really good, like a real like 360-degree environment. Next slide, please, Michael. Another another kind of exploration we did is we're thinking how we can do kind of a digital exhibition. So we actually had a very preliminary discussion with our archive special collection and Olivier and Allison, but we haven't done with the special collection yet, but I think we believe we'll do that at one point. So this is one of the collaborative research project we have done with a prof from the RT Media School, and the professor named Ramona Pringle, and so she has this idea about her creative AI project, essentially to train like 100,000 of older movie poster, and to let the AI or the GAN to spin off its own version of the movie poster. So we just want to try to use this immersive environment to do potentially to do a digital exhibition. So there's a lot of other cases like that. Michael, do you want to continue with your?
Yep. So yeah, thank you for all that. One thing I wanted to just get everyone's attention on is the what's going on here within this environment. So as Fangmin was mentioning, this is a studio that we have in the library right now, and it's a tool for faculty and students. But you'll see at the top here, I took this image purposely to show the projectors. So there are 5 projectors that are mounted on the ceiling, and they stitch this image together that's seamless, so that you can take 360 content and project it within the space, so that you can have things like if you, for example, had a 360 video that normally you would view on a VR headset. Usually VR headsets are isolating and they're usually only for one person. But if you bring it into this environment, you can actually share that experience between up to 12 people. Now, with COVID restrictions, we recommend only 6 because we gotta distance ourselves. And this environment is only 6 meters in diameter, but it does provide an interesting or a good alternative to how we can present 360 content to a larger group of people. So this particular project, I just want to briefly talk about it. Essentially, it uses artificial intelligence we have a bunch of, or let's say a set of old movie posters, and we program the artificial intelligence so that it interprets those images and then spits out images based on what we give it. Basically, it starts spitting out random images, and the images are these unique movie posters of what it thinks, or how it interprets those old movie posters. So this is actually an example of one of those AI generated posters. And one thing I just want to kind of talk about is sort of my involvement with this project was, we'll see this text at the bottom, which is for credits that you would normally see on movie posters. But the AI is mostly trained to look at images. So it does it does a good job at interpreting what text should look like, but it has a hard time replicating text that you can read. So you'll notice like here it says deal are changing, which is the title, right? But this title, the title was created through AI, but it wasn't actually input onto the poster. So what I mean by that is I created this custom font face for these posters, along with a bunch of sort of random characters to kind of fill in some space. And I intervened essentially on these posters, and I got rid of, again, this is in Photoshop, I should mention that. I removed the original text that it input. So this is actually the original poster that we see. And I removed that, and I used my custom font face, and I put in the title that was generated by another artificial intelligence. And that title was Dealer Changing. So yeah, basically, sorry. Yeah, basically, my involvement with that is, again, just removing the text, creating the custom font face, putting in the title, and then exporting that. And then what we see here in the Immersion Studio is like an example of how we can take those artworks. This is just a collection of, or a handful of them, but how we can take some of those artworks displayed in a 360 environment like this as almost like a temporary gallery exhibit. I'm going to skip past this video just because this is a 360 video that I pulled from YouTube. It's from Hong Kong Free Press. And essentially it's a 360 documentary video of showing the protests of Hong Kong when, I think, yeah, it was in June 2019. So during all the protests in Hong Kong, there was a bunch of documentation on that and 360 video. And the reason why I was going to show this is because I can take this video or any 360 content that exists on the web and I can pull it directly into our 360 environment. So it's really easy to take your content and bring it into the 360 environment to either do basic visualization or prototyping or collaboration. Too with our immersive environment is that we can take 3D models and we can also bring those 3D models into the immersion studio. So this picture here is actually a render of one of the renovations that's going to be happening within our university library. And this is essentially a study room on the 8th floor, I believe, of our library. So I was provided with the render of the image. This is a render of what that mock-up looks like. This is the 3D model. They provided me with the 3D model. So what we see here is the 3D model in Blender, which is a 3D modeling software. And then this is a picture of it running in Unity. So by taking the 3D model and bringing it into Unity, I can then, I'm just going to play this video. And just for a little bit more context, this video was taken within the Immersion Studio. So this is me interacting with the 3D environment that I brought into Unity. So what we saw right here, this is me walking through the environment within Unity in the Immersion Studio. So you see I've got these sort of movement pads here, and I can walk around the environment and showcase different rooms within the Immersion Studio. So right now what I'm doing is I'm pulling away from my console. I have a console here that I'm interacting with, and every time you see me pull back like that, I'm just trying to showcase how the image is being wrapped around the Immersion Studio.
Something to do with robots.
So you can have things like videos, interactive videos that you can also play within Unity, and that's what I'm showcasing here.
We had an idea about
Kind of scrub past here for a second, but it's really interesting when you have it within the Immersion Studio, I'm actually using it right now as mostly a visualization tool for architecture. So again, if I had an AutoCAD drawing, or sorry, an AutoCAD 3D model, or a 3D model that was created in Blender, I can essentially take that 3D model, import it into Unity, and then have this interaction going so that if I was an architecture class, or if I was an architecture, if I was designing something and I wanted to pitch it to a client or something like that, I could use this Immersion Studio as a tool to showcase this to a larger group of people instead of just using traditional VR headsets. So do you want to quickly take over here, Fangmin?
Cool. Maybe you can take a look at Zach's question, because we still have a few slides we want to run here. So I want to briefly mention about what we have done so far in terms of how we engage with our academic community, right? And Michael, can you just remove your chat box?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So what we have done is basically we have engaged with a few potential pilot partner for who want to use our Immersion Studio. So this slide shows a few, one of the faculty members from the documentary media. So he brought a few grad students coming and visited the Immersion Studio, and obviously they're very interested. They want the grad student to do some project potentially using this environment. Next slide, please, Michael. And so I think it was a few weeks ago, and we kind of invited one for our indigenous digital humanities scholar, Yaz Morgan, to our environment, and just explain what this environment, immersive environment, will enhance the teaching, learning, and research. And so I'm pleased to say that, and Yaz is going to bring their class probably in the new semester to use our environment, potential for some assignment. So this slide is actually, we took this picture actually yesterday, and one of our aerospace engineering faculty, Kazim, and his researcher partner just coming to our environment and take a look how potentially they can use for maybe for even the plane simulation. I hope that will be the case going forward. Next slide, please. Okay. And but through the collaboration with faculty students, one thing I would say is really important to engage with the liaison library group of our library. So this is a picture how we explain to our head of law librarian and John, and he's very interested using this maybe have created a similar environment in our future law library. I don't know if it's gonna be happening in the next 5 to 10 years, but anyway, but we have also really engaged with our subject liaison library group, and we're gonna continue to do that because it's really important to have that kind of connection there. Michael, continue.
Okay, yeah, so I can take over here, and this is again an image within the Immersion Studio showcasing some of the work that is already being developed for the Immersion Studio. So this is from another professor within Ryerson. Her name's Linda Zhang, and her students, she teaches interior design, by the way. So she's using a lot of 360 video and a lot of 360 content already within her class. And just for basic visualization, and when you're designing things for, let's say, spaces, or let's say, again, architecture, which is what we can see here on the left. So there's already a lot of interesting use cases that her students have been creating. And again, it's creating a lot of interest of how we view some of this content, because normally we would either view this 360 content on a VR headset, on a smartphone, or on your computer. And those methods are all really good ways of visualizing 360 content. But if you wanted to bring a large group of people to view 360 content quickly, this is definitely one of the ways that you can do that.
Michael, we only have 1 minute left.
Okay, so I'm just gonna
maybe we should ask Zach's question. Sorry, everyone. We're so bad at managing our time. And
yeah, we have a lot of information.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me see Zach's question. Hold on.
And the Igloo Cylinder
software support multi-device XR, for example, AR layered over 360 imagery, video projected. Yes, it does. So I could maybe I'll record a video of that next time for my next presentation, but you could, for example, have a 360 video playing and then have 2D images on top of that. Like, for example, if I was doing a presentation, I could have, or it could even be like a 3D simulation. Like I could have my 3D simulation playing in the background and I could overlay content on top of that as well. You could even have things like a 360 video playing in the background and then have a 2D video or just a regular video playing on the foreground, if that makes sense. So the best way to describe it I can think of is the Immersion Studio is almost like a really large monitor that wraps around you. So it's almost like if you had a really long extended display or 5 displays that curved around you in a circle. That's essentially like how you could think about how you could use the Immersion Studio. So it's not so much the limitations of what the Immersion Studio can do. It's what can't you like it's what can you do within, let's say, Unity, for example, or um, the capabilities of the computer that it's running on. So if you had a really strong computer, which again, the Immersion Studio is actually running on a pretty sophisticated computer, it's able to run a lot of these tasks at the same time. So yes, there are a whole bunch of things that you can use in combination with each other. And that also includes things like if I wanted to use VR and the Immersion Studio at the same time, like a VR headset and the Immersion Studio at the same time, I can do that.
So Michael, since we are really already over the time, maybe we can skip the whatever the
whole metaverse
metaverse
thing.
component. So just
Okay.
for everyone's information, Michael is actually plan to do a metaverse talk, and through our kind of collaboratory programming next semester. So we could actually send an invitation to everyone through this e-learning planning committee, and if you're interested, you're welcome to attend that session, right?
Yeah, for sure. Just one slide that I wanted everyone to take note of because we're talking about all this technology, but not everybody has access to this technology. So it's important to understand that, sure, we have all this great technology that we utilize in the RU library, but at the same time, there are a lot of people who are not fortunate enough who have access to this technology. So there are things that we always have to question, like in terms of things like accessibility, things like digital equity and digital divide. So one of the main things that I want to drive home is just the digital divide itself and how maybe even some of you who are listening to this presentation might have been experiencing over COVID is like if you don't have a good laptop or a good computer, you're not able to interact with content the same way others can. Sometimes your computer might be bogged down with things like sharing screens. Like I know that I used to have a laptop that sharing screens was kind of a really hard for it to do. So it's hard for me to deliver content or teach content when your computer is not up to snuff. And this increases what's called essentially the digital divide, which are at one point the digital divide used to be people who had access to the internet and people who didn't have access to the internet, but now it's more so people who are technologically advantaged and people who are technologically disadvantaged. So if I had a computer, for example, or a smartphone from like 10 years ago, it's going to be harder for me to access a lot of this content in terms of, especially when it comes to things like augmented reality and 3D modeling software. So we always have to understand that as we create these new opportunities for students to learn and interact with technology, we also have to sort of consider like, okay, how does this increase the digital divide and how can we create more opportunities for people who are more technologically disadvantaged? I don't have all those questions or the answers to all those questions right now, but I just want to make sure that everybody understands that we are conscientious of this, these challenges, because there is always going to be challenges when it comes to immersive technology and education. So this is just if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. If you can stick around, we can, I'm not sure if we're able to, but you can send us an email, like you can send me an email here, and Fangmin, this is his email here. These QR codes, again, we're just kind of, I always like to put the QR codes link that go directly to our LinkedIn. So if you want to connect with us on LinkedIn, you can. You can just scan those QR codes. Again, it's kind of in fashion of COVID right now. I'm not sure if QR codes are going to be around that much longer after COVID, but I think it's kind of, I feel like they're kind of here to stay. So this is just one way that we can showcase how you can use them, I guess. Okay, any questions?
Thank you very much for your kind words. And Michael, we can hand over to the organizer, see what.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sorry, my cat decided she wants to rub her face against my touch screen. Yes, so how about we release everyone for a quick 10-minute break? We do have a session with you and Gibson and music, so that's very exciting. But if there are any more questions for Michael or Fangmin, definitely send them through.